वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा.
The Bhagavad Gita is a wonderful manual for life. The Bhagavad Gita is so beneficial because it not only gives us the what, but it clearly lays out the how to attain freedom. This makes it possible for ordinary human beings like us to follow practical step-by-step advice and aspire for liberation or Jivan Mukti. There are several sections in Bhagavad Gita that adopt this beautiful how-to approach. For example, in chapter 3, there is a clearly laid out 5-point program to pursue Karma Yoga. Similarly, in chapter 6, there is a clear 8-step guide as a preparation to meditation, also known as attain Sadhanāni. Today, we will cover one such beautiful section of the Bhagavad Gita. We will be covering the Sthitapragnya Sādhanāni section of Bhagavad Gita from chapter 2. This refers to the disciplines that are required to become a Sthitapragnya, and it is found between verses 58 to 68 of chapter 2. So, who is a Sthitapragnya? A Sthitapragnya is one who has gained equanimity, one who is free from attachment, free from anger, free from greed, etc. We may know about this intellectually, but is intellectual knowledge good enough? The answer is a clear no, because while we may know about it intellectually, unfortunately, when we are faced with life's difficult situations, we are back to our old self by becoming vulnerable to anger, jealousy, greed, etc. The situation is like oil and water, as Swami Param likes to say. Oil and water, as we know, do not mix. Similarly, when we are confronted with life's difficult situations, knowledge will remain in one corner and our life's problems like anger, attachment, and greed will remain in another corner. So, of what use is Vedanta if it cannot help us during the challenging situations of life? Transformation at an intellectual level is cognitive change, but that alone is not good enough. This knowledge must be converted into emotional strength so that whenever we are confronted with life's difficult situations, we can still remain a balanced person. Attachment is an emotional problem. Anger is an emotional problem. Depression is an emotional problem. Hence, we require not only intellectual transformation, but more importantly, we require emotional transformation. This emotional transformation will convert us from prajna to Sthitapragnya. So the important question then is, how do we convert this intellectual knowledge into emotional strength? This is the answer that Lord Krishna gives in the Sthitapragnya Sādhanāni section. So let's get right into it. Lord Krishna describes 3 exercises. The first is Indriya Nigraha, or discipline over senses. The second is Mano Nigraha, or discipline over thoughts. And the third is Nididhyasanam, or dwelling over the teachings. Let's start with discipline over the senses, or Indriya Nigraha. Our senses provide a 5-fold entrance gate into the mind. Everything that is happening in the world in the form of Sabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, and Gandha is capable of entering the mind and affecting it. For example, a single harsh word can agitate our mind. So, we need to be very mindful about what we allow to enter through our senses, especially the kind of stimuli that's capable of generating violent emotions. In our apartments, we have a compound wall that protects outsiders from entering the apartment. Then there is a security guard at the gate. Finally, we have a door and a lock in front of our house. So as we can see, we have multiple levels of control before anyone can even enter our house. But what about our mind? We allow anything and everything to enter our mind and disturb our mind. As Swami Chinmayananda so humorously put it, if we allow anyone and everyone to enter our house just like we allowed people to freely enter our mind, our house would become a public toilet. So, if we wish to keep our mind undisturbed, we should stop treating our mind like a public toilet. We don't realize it, but our senses are extremely powerful and can cause violent emotional disturbance of our mind if it's allowed to go unchecked. In verse 60, Lord Krishna gives the beautiful metaphor of a pramati or a churning rod. Have you seen how a churning rod violently churns the curd? Similarly, our sense organs act as a churning rod, not one, but five churning rods that can violently churn the mind and can cause emotional disturbance. A disturbed mind is not fit for Vedantic study. We need a calm and tranquil mind for Vedanta study. So let's be careful about allowing anything and everything to enter our mind through the senses. Here are a few useful techniques that can prevent our sense organs from going astray. The first is that prevention is a better approach. The second is to avoid arguments. And the third is to realize that sense pursuits take away a lot of our time. So let's take a look at some of this in a little more detail. First is prevention. Prevention is always a better approach. Take the example of addictive drugs like marijuana. It's easy to resist them for the first time. But once a person consumes it, the next time it becomes more difficult. And the third time, it becomes almost impossible to say no. Swami Param gives the beautiful analogy of Vali from Ramayana. As long as Vali is not in front of you, there's no problem. At the moment Vali appears in front of you, half of your strength is gone. And that's the same with sense pleasures. So, prevention is the best strategy. In verse 58, Krishna gives a beautiful metaphor of the tortoise, where he says, Kurma Angani Samharate, meaning the tortoise withdraws its limbs whenever it senses external threat. Similarly, withdraw your senses the moment you realize that there's an external stimuli that could disturb you. The second is to avoid arguments. Arguments have a tendency to disturb us emotionally. And the funny thing about arguments is that once we get into an argument, there's no going back. Each party tries to prove they are right, and nobody is ready to relent. Swami Param again gives a beautiful example for toothpaste. Once the toothpaste comes out of the tube, and you push it back into the tube, as they say, in an argument, only heat is generated and no light. Because an argument is not about clarifying what is right. An argument is about proving who is right. It's nothing but a battle of egos. The third is to realize that sense pursuits take away a lot of our time, and that time could be very gainfully employed in developing ourselves. Reason sense pleasures take away our time is very interesting, and it's very important to realize it. Because not only are we spending our time when we are enjoying those sense pursuits, even when we are done, the mind cannot stop thinking about it. It wants to repeat that pleasant experience. Let's say we enjoy a tasty masala dosa at MTR. Even after we are done eating at MTR, our mind keeps thinking we should perhaps try out the next masala dosa at Vidyarthi Bhavan. This keeps repeating on and on. As they say, fulfilled desire leads to greed. Hence, we need to discipline our mind against sense pursuits, and we will find that a lot of time is available at our disposal that we can gainfully employ. Let's now move to the next discipline, which is Manonigraha or thought discipline. Thought discipline is a very important discipline, and in some ways, it is more difficult than sense discipline. You can physically avoid sensory stimuli by shielding yourself. But what about the mind? Even without stepping out of your house, mind can travel the entire world. You may avoid sensory stimuli by avoiding to see it, but your mind can always dwell upon it. Hence, thought discipline is much more difficult. So, how do we practice thought discipline? Here, Swami Param gives an extremely useful advice. A thought can easily enter our mind. We often have no control, But Swami Param says that is fine. One passing thought cannot do any damage because one thought cannot cause an emotion. It's a thought build-up that causes an emotion. Thought build-up, I mean allowing your mind to dwell on the same topic again and again. Let's say a friend said something bad about you. Momentarily, you may not like it, but what really causes the damage is due to the fact that the thought goes back and dwells upon it again and again. Why did he say this to me? Does he want to cause damage to my reputation? Does he have some ulterior motive? Does he want to pull me down? We overanalyze it. And this thought buildup is what causes deep emotions that can disturb us. Now, the initial thought entering our mind may not be in our control. However, whether or not we allow our mind to dwell on this thought is within our control. But we need to be alert and nip it at the bud. I'd like to narrate an interesting Native American story. An old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. He says, "A fight is going on inside me. It's a terrible fight between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, and arrogance. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, and kindness. This fight is going on not just inside me, it's going on inside you, and it's going on inside every other person." Grandson thought about it for a minute, then curiously asked his grandfather, "So, grandfather, which wolf is going to win?" Grandfather wisely replied, "This one you feed. We feed the mind with good thoughts, the good wolf will win. And if we feed our mind with bad thoughts, the bad wolf will win. So let's be mindful of the thoughts that we dwell upon." In verse 62 and 63, Lord Krishna beautifully explains how dwelling of the mind on material objects leads from one thing to another and eventually results in our downfall. Initially, it all looks fine and harmless. But then when we continue down the path, it turns out to be a downward spiral. Let us see how. It starts with what Lord Krishna calls as Vishya Dhyanam, or dwelling of the mind on the object. When we dwell our mind on a certain object, we develop a liking for it. For example, when we hear an advertisement jingle again and again, it kind of grows on us and we start liking it. So Lord Krishna calls it Vishya Dhyanam Sangat Jayate, meaning when we dwell on an object, we develop a fancy for it. So far, we see no problem. We're only appreciating something after all. However, it does not stop here. As I had mentioned, one thing leads to another. Initially, we start appreciating the object. Slowly, we start liking it. Then comes a stage when we start wanting it. And then comes a stage when we cannot do without it. We now have reached the stage of karma. So, Vishya Dhyana leads to Vishya Sangha. And Vishya Sangha leads to Vishya Kama. So the problem, as you see, is getting more serious. But it does not end here. There could be two routes, both equally dangerous. Our desire may be fulfilled or our desire may not be fulfilled. Desire can get fulfilled, but that will lead to greater desire. We want more, and that leads to greed. On the other hand, desire also may not get fulfilled sometimes. Nowadays, after all, there's competition for everything. So if the desire does not get fulfilled, it may lead to anger. So anger is nothing but a desire in a different form. Anger is nothing but obstructed desire. So fulfilled desire leads to greed and unfulfilled desire leads to anger. Because of anger, discriminative power is lost. In a fit of anger, we may do stupid things like disrespecting elders. In verse 3, Lord Krishna calls it as sammoha or non-discrimination. It further leads to smriti brahma, meaning knowledge is lost temporarily. If we allow to go further, it will lead to buddhi nasha, which is permanent loss of discrimination. And this is the point of no return. Finally, Krishna says, Buddhi Nasha Pranashayanti. Loss of discrimination is the loss of human life. So, here is the 8-rung ladder to human fall. Vishyadhyanam, Sangha, Kama, Krodha, Sanmoha, Smriti-Bhramasha, Buddhinasha, Pranasha. It all starts very innocently by dwelling upon the object or Vishyadhyanam. Hence, we should master our mind. Without mental discipline, humans can descend into chaos. We need to be mentally alert, and if we can tackle the thoughts at the first rung of the ladder, that is by avoiding Vishyadhyanam, it is much easier to exercise thought discipline or Manonigraha. Now, let's move to the third and final discipline of Sthitapragnya Sādhanāni, which is to dwell upon the teachings or Nididhyasanam. This topic is dealt with briefly in the 2nd chapter, and in the 6th chapter, it is dealt with in much greater detail. A guru can impart knowledge to us, but to convert that knowledge into emotional strength is our job. Like the old saying goes, you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make it drink. Similarly, a guru can impart Vedanta knowledge to us, but now drinking that knowledge, assimilating it, and converting it into emotional strength is our responsibility. So how do we do it? In order to imbue ourselves in Vedantic knowledge, we basically need to dwell upon it again and again and meditate upon it. Just like a piece of mango that floats in oil and spices so that it absorbs the flavor, the smell, the taste, and converts itself into a tasty pickle, we should also float and swim in the knowledge so that every cell of our body is imbued with the teaching. Only then we will be able to invoke this teaching in difficult life situations so that we are able to retain our equilibrium. Otherwise, remember the story of oil and water? Our Vedanta knowledge will remain in one corner and all our good old traits like Lobha, Moha, Kama and Krodha will remain in another corner. We become what we meditate upon. If we do Vishya Dhyana, we will reach the destination of Vishya or the material object. On the other hand, if we do Ishvara Dhyanam, we will reach liberation. Now, let us look at a few techniques to practice Nididhyasanam. The first is to take notes. Taking notes is a very useful way to reinforce our understanding. As long as the topic is in the book, it's in the author's head. It's the author's thought process. It may or may not have entered our head, but the moment we write it down in our notes, it becomes our own understanding. We may or may not read the notes later, but that's fine. It still benefits us. The second technique is to explain our understanding to someone else. It could be our friend, our spouse, our children. Whoever is ready to listen to us, explain it to him or to her. In the process, we will find that our own understanding enhances a lot. This platform is in fact an excellent opportunity. On the Shivaratri day, when Dr. Hegde sir announced about this initiative, I felt that it was a great opportunity. In order to make this session, I had to read and reread Swami Param's Bhagavad Gita commentary several times, underline it, take notes, prepare slides, and finally record this session. The third is to break psychological dependence. Nididhyasanam is an exercise of breaking ourselves from the rut of routine thinking. We have so many dependencies in life, and we think that we cannot live without them. Just like the smoker who thinks that he cannot live without tobacco. However, remember, the same smoker did not depend upon tobacco 10 or 15 years back when he had not yet taken to smoking. Similarly, we think that life is complete only when we have things around us. We have strong vasanas and we need to break out of these. We may need some objects for our physical survival, but to be happy psychologically, we don't need anything external. I just need myself. And we need to practice this, repeat it, and own up our own independence. So, To recap, we need three disciplines to achieve Sthitapragnya. The first is Indriya Nigraha or sense discipline. The second is Mano Nigraha or thought discipline. And the third is Nididhyasanam or dwelling upon the Vedantic teaching. Before concluding the section, Lord Krishna issues a stern warning. Lord Krishna emphatically says, for those who do not have sense and thought discipline, knowledge is not possible. Buddhi nasti, meaning Shravanam, Manadam, and Nididhyasanam is not possible. And if a person does not practice Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam, what's the consequence? Shanti nasti, peace of mind is not possible, because real peace of mind cannot come from external things. It can only come by realizing our inner self. That is possible only through Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam. And for that, we require a tranquil mind. And to achieve a tranquil mind that is fit receptacle for Vedanta, sense discipline, and thought discipline is a prerequisite. So Lord Krishna is absolutely right when he issues a stern warning. Knowledge is not possible for an undisciplined mind.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.